one of the deadliest places on Earth. A hot zone where ships and airplanes vanish without a trace. But halfway around the globe, at its polar opposite, there lies another triangle. This one more mysterious and more deadly. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Dragon's Triangle is an area where ships disappear, planes disappear, and other kind of phenomena occur.
There's really no way to predict what sorts of things you're going to see out here. And we do see some pretty odd stuff.
We'll explore the mysteries, the evidence, and the science behind one of the most treacherous, dangerous, and puzzling triangle regions on the planet.
If your ship was right on top of that gas bubble, you would sink because you wouldn't have enough buoyancy to keep your ship floating.
As events involving ships, planes, and submarines continue to terrify passengers and mystify experts, many wonder, what is down there? And what could possibly be next in the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle? 25 degrees north, 142 degrees east. These are the coordinates of the center of one of the most mysterious triangle regions on Earth. For centuries, this area has hosted some of the most bizarre disappearances of ships, airplanes, and loss of life anywhere on the planet. But this is not the Bermuda Triangle. It is a 500,000 square mile area located in the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Devil's Sea, or the Dragon's Triangle, is an area off the southern coast of Japan where supposedly many unexplained shipwrecks have taken place, where planes have disappeared, very similar to the Bermuda Triangle in, of course, a very different part of the world.
The Dragon's Triangle is a large area of water off the east coast of Japan, bounded by Japan and Guam, in the Philippine Sea, in which navigators and ships have reported for thousands of years loss of ships, loss of compass readings, and strange objects flying out of the water.
Curiously, its counterpoint in the Atlantic, the infamous Bermuda Triangle, lies directly across the globe, along the 35-degree latitude line. Both areas are believed to contain some of the world's deepest waters, much of which remains unexplored to this day.
Both the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Sea lie along the same latitude, and both have the same anomaly where geographic north and magnetic north seem to come together, so compass readings are off by 20 degrees. And that's why researchers believe there are so many lost planes and ships in these areas.
It's quite interesting to see that they are both at exactly the same location.
The boundaries of the Dragon's Triangle are generally believed to stretch from central Japan to Guam to the Mariana Islands. While lesser known to the west than the Bermuda Triangle, unexplained disappearances and strange phenomena occur in this area with a far greater and more alarming frequency. Since World War II, it is believed that over 1,500 vessels and hundreds of military, commercial, and civilian aircraft have disappeared.
The Dragon's Triangle has had many more ships disappear than the Bermuda Triangle. And the ships that have disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle have been large ones, military ships, cargo ships.
What's so odd about the Dragon's Triangle compared to the Bermuda Triangle is that the Bermuda Triangle has so much more press. Why would that be?
The area first gained modern notoriety in 1989 with the publication of Charles Berlitz's The Dragon's Triangle. Berlitz, coincidentally, was the author of the book The Bermuda Triangle, which reopened that mysterious case in 1974. For years, Berlitz studied the reports of ship and aircraft disappearances in this area, along with reports of UFO sightings and other anomalies. According to his research, compasses often fail or give wildly inaccurate readings in the triangle. Boats and airplanes report being moved far off course in a matter of seconds. Sightings of ghost ships have been reported for over 100 years. And finally, hundreds of ships, airplanes, and even submarines have, without warning, fallen to the bottom of this extremely deep region. One of Berlitz's most terrifying and puzzling unsolved cases involves what he considers unseen and unknown forces that pulled legendary pilot Amelia Earhart down to her death in the heart of the Triangle in 1937.
She goes more than 2/3 of the way around the world, over 22,000 miles. I look eastward over the Pacific, she writes. I shall be glad when we have the hazards of its navigation behind us. This fleeting radio contact is the last verified report of Amelia Earhart.
Here's a story where Amelia Earhart was flying off Guam. Some say she was on a spy mission for the United States, and she lost her compass bearings.
July 2nd, 1937, 12:30 p.m. Pioneering aviator Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan left Lae, New Guinea on the last leg of a round-the-world flight. Their flight plan would have taken them 2,500 miles to Howland Island for a refueling stop and over the Dragon's Triangle. The two were never seen again.
Her compass and her instruments went down. Her plane was lost. She was never heard from again.
To this day, Earhart's disappearance remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved cases.
The Dragon's Triangle is also host to stories of ghost ships appearing out of the fog.
Berlitz associates the Dragon's Triangle with one of the sea's greatest mysteries as well, ghost ships. Large ships floating at sea, completely devoid of people, cargo, and equipment. He claims the region has been fraught with unmanned floating hulks for centuries.
In Japanese tradition, these ghost ships are typically malevolent. They want to destroy the living people that they run into.
Ghost ships exceeding 100,000 tons have been seen floating aimlessly in the Dragon's Triangle. If true, how does an entire crew vanish without a trace? Berlitz points out a pair of horrifying ghost ship cases in his book. June 11th, 1881, 4 a.m. According to reports, the HMS Bashante encountered the legendary glowing Flying Dutchman ghost ship late at night in the deepest area of the Dragon's Triangle. A naval ensign aboard the ship, a prince who would later become England's King George V, made the following entry in the ship's log.
The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. She emitted a strange phosphorescent light, as of a phantom ship, all aglow. She came up on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge saw her. But on arrival there was no vestige, or any sign whatever, of any material ship to be seen, either near or right away to the horizon. The night became clear, and the sea calm.
January 1989. Berlitz says that a Japanese whaling ship skippered by Captain Moro Sagakami came within 50 feet of a small fishing boat that was bobbing erratically in their course one dark, clear night. The captain and several crew members arrived to find a ship completely barren of all crew and cargo, save for the corpse of the captain, still gripping the helm.
As far as ghost ships are concerned, what if the crews themselves were abductees? So the reason the vessel is adrift, the reason there's no crew, no remains, is that the crews are simply gone, taken by a USO.
According to Berlitz's research, dozens of vessels have gone even further off the radar. They have disappeared from the Triangle entirely. On April 19, 1949, the Kuroshio Maru No. 1 disappears with a reported crew of 23. On June 8, 1952, 29 crew members of the Chifuku Maru No. 5 vanish. June 26, 1955, a U.S. Air Force F-3B jet loses radio contact with its base. Its two-man crew disappears. March 12, 1957, 8 crewmen aboard a United States Air Force KD-50 tanker transport are reported missing. June 7, 1963. Remains of the Donan Maru are found floating on the ocean surface off Shio-Nomizaki. But an event forever etched into triangle lore and Japanese history is the mysterious sinking of the Japanese research vessel Kaio Maru No. 5.
Kaio Maru No. 5 was a Coast Guard ship researching about that area.
On September 24, 1952, the Japanese Maritime Safety Agency research vessel Kaio Maru No. 5 is in the Dragon's Triangle.
She went out to the Dragon's Triangle specifically to find out the cause of all the losses of vessels in that area.
Suddenly, without any distress call, she disappears forever, taking with her a crew of 22 and 9 scientists. In their official Kaio Maru No. 5 accident investigation report from March 1953, the Marine Coast Guard states, "We have to investigate when, where, why it disappeared, because there are no witnesses and no survivors for this accident." While many conclude that the ship fell victim to an underwater volcano's eruption, others remain unconvinced.
Very ironic that here you have a ship that's going out looking for other ships and it disappears. And that oftentimes happens in these mysterious triangles.
Because of this event's importance to Japanese maritime history, today in Tokyo there is a shrine dedicated to the memory of those lost in this mysterious sinking. Coming up, commercial and military pilots and captains report frightening shifts of the time-space continuum when navigating through the Dragon's Triangle.
He had experienced missing time during the period he saw the UFO.
Like the Bermuda Triangle in the Atlantic, the Dragon's Triangle in the Pacific just off Japan is believed to play havoc with the so-called time-space continuum of planet Earth. This unexplained phenomenon reportedly causes ships and airplanes to be forced off course by miles and miles, and for clocks to suddenly change time, all in an instant.
Some of the theories for the Dragon's Triangle include that it's anomaly, that there's some kind of magnetic anomaly, that there's some kind of black hole in the ocean, that there's something from outer space that zooms down and has some kind of interaction with, craft there and they disappear. But as far as we know, things happen there and we don't know why.
In the late 1950s, American television and radio personality Arthur Godfrey, an accomplished pilot in his own right, reportedly experiences a frightening occurrence in the Dragon's Triangle, one that nearly cost him his life.
In the 1950s, the band leader and television personality from America, Arthur Godfrey, was piloting a twin-engine craft over the Dragon's Triangle. He saw a USO. The instruments on his plane went dead. He was low on fuel. He had to navigate by the sun because his compass was out. When his instruments came back on and he was able to get over land again, he found out the same exact thing, that he had experienced missing time during the period.
With only enough fuel for 3 hours, Godfrey piloted his craft on dead reckoning. After 1 hour, his instrumentation returned, and he was able to return to course. However, Godfrey would later report that he inexplicably lost a half hour. His clocks literally rolled backwards. Fortunately for Godfrey and his crew, they safely arrived in Tokyo, avoiding the terrible fate of Amelia Earhart and countless others in the Dragon's Triangle. Other similar time-space anomalies over the Triangle have been reported by military pilots in the 1950s and 60s, including Air Force pilot Frank Hopkins, an advisor to the 106th Air Transport Group. In the summer of 1968, he wrote to Argosy magazine with a story of a time-space continuum shift while flying a C-97 Stratofreighter over the Dragon's Triangle. In the spring of 1966, I was a basic navigator aboard an Irrigard C-97 flying from Kwajalein Island to Guam. We looked forward to a pleasant night flight of about 6 to 6.5 hours. Hopkins says that, as per protocol, he plots his position hourly using star navigation. But during the 3rd hour of the flight, something inexplicable occurs. I shot a second celestial fix. Weather was excellent. Only problem was, and I almost fell out of the airplane when I put this on the chart, this last fix was almost 340 nautical miles down intended course. I rechecked and rechecked. A plugging old C-97 covered 340 nautical miles in 1 hour of time for no apparent reason. Later, upon landing on Guam, Hopkins reports to his duty officer that his airplane jumped many hundreds of miles ahead of course, but no report is filed. Hopkins says that he remains convinced, however, that this area is indeed home to peculiar forces that pose great danger to airplanes and ships. Due to the confluence of these events, experts continue to feel other forces might possibly be at work deep below the triangle.
Of all the anomalies in the Dragon's Triangle, none are more mysterious than the vast number of sightings of UFOs.
According to Charles Berlitz's Dragon's Triangle, he believes the most notorious cause of deadly events in the area are the specter of UFOs and their underwater counterparts, USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Quote, a number of ships that have disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle have been sunk by USOs. These events were often attributed in ancient times to angry demons or dragons.
The Japanese were very influenced by the Chinese, and the Chinese were great believers in dragons, and that these dragons were somehow at sea and they could, rise up. And the dragon was both a propitious and a threatening symbol.
UFO experts in Japan and researchers like Berlitz all believe the apparitions in the triangle, thought to be monsters and dragons by early witnesses, were in fact UFOs. These reports continue to this day.
As we studied about this area, we found many interesting scientific reasons for these incidents, which had been called mysterious.
There was a report in the Japan Sea by a fishing boat. The fishermen reported seeing a huge UFO flying back and forth and lights in the ocean.
Japanese ufologist Junichiro Kato, head of Our J, the Organization of UFO Research Japan, has been studying UFO phenomenon for almost 20 years. He has seen UFOs on numerous occasions over the waters near Japan and has photographed many of his sightings.
I have so many photographs. There are maybe over 200 sightings. At one point, I witnessed 1 or 2 a month.
The eastern tip of the Dragon's Triangle is believed by experts to even include portions of the city of Tokyo. On June 14, 1997, Kato snapped a photograph of a fast-moving glowing disk, moving at, he estimates, over 500 miles per hour just above the waters off Tokyo Bay.
I took a picture of 3 UFOs flying in formation over the ocean near Tokyo Disneyland. The 3 UFOs made a triangle shape. This event was seen by 10 witnesses.
The event was phoned into local Tokyo news outlets by several witnesses, but media reports were never filed. Kato was not the only modern Japanese witness to inform the History Channel of sightings of UFO-like objects over the Dragon's Triangle. Nobu Miyoshi, a Tokyo-based magazine editor, witnessed a UFO over the Dragon's Triangle while on this quiet beach about 30 miles south of Tokyo in 1990.
In August of 1990, I saw an airplane going in one direction, and a white light appeared very close to the jet, and I wondered what it was. It moved like it was writing a W in the sky. It moved at 1 kilometer per second. It was quite quick. Before that, I didn't believe in UFOs. But since then, I became a believer.
This unique experience leaves an indelible impression on Nobu.
I wasn't scared. I was very surprised. I'd love to see it again and watch it much closer.
Throughout the 20th century, eyewitness reports of UFO sightings in the Dragon's Triangle began to swell, from verbal reports from fishermen to official reports from military men and women. After World War II, the Soviet Navy had one of the largest active fleets in the Northern Pacific. Over the years, Sailors and officers aboard these vessels have been responsible for some of the best UFO reports in the Dragon's Triangle.
In
1977, the Reconnaissance Division of the Soviet Navy organized a scientific research project to examine the issue of UFOs in the water. I was in charge of this group. At the end of 1977, we gave our large naval vessels instructions on how to observe UFOs.
August 18, 1980. According to reports from Moscow-based UFO experts Vladimir Azhaja, the Russian research vessel Vladimir Volbedov moved slowly south through the Dragon's Triangle, around Japan, heading toward Okinawa. Just after midnight, suddenly and without warning, a cylindrical metallic UFO-like object is seen to rise slowly from the sea, hover, then dart away into the sky. The object's ability to hover has caused experts like Azhaja to believe that the craft was not man-made. To this day, the event remains a mystery. 8 months after this Russian event, another significant incident occurs in almost the exact same location.
One of the more recent cases, and a fascinating case, is the Takikyoto Maru from 1981. They spotted a UFO, actually a USO, coming out of the water.
April 17, 1981. It is a clear day and the seas are calm. The 165-foot Japanese freighter Takikyoto Maru is sailing 200 miles off Kanazawa with over 30 crew members. Suddenly, the crew is rocked as shockwaves roll through their ship. The seamen immediately assume they've been hit.
April 17th of 1981, a Japanese ship sailing off the coast of Japan in an area that is noted as the Dragon's Triangle encountered a UFO that came out of the sea violently and caused huge waves to buffet the ship.
Captain Usuda is at the helm when a bright, saucer-shaped object rises out of the water. The USO is over 50 feet in diameter and hovers silently over the ship.
The ship's instruments, the compass, the various dials, the engines, all began to blur as the USO circled around the ship. The captain estimated that the USO circled the ship for about 15 minutes, then plunged back into the water.
The waves were so violent, Usuda reports, the ship nearly capsized. Even more fierce turbulence occurs when the USO returns to the water.
Here's the intriguing thing. When the instruments came back on, the captain compared the time on the radio to the time on the watches and found out the ship had lost 15 minutes in time.
Coming up, a near-miss collision over the Dragon's Triangle almost dooms air passengers, crewmen, and the UFO. Reports of UFOs observing and hovering close to large ships is not new to the Dragon's Triangle. According to Japanese ufologist Junichiro Narasawa, a Japanese government research vessel, Kaiyo Maru, is a ship with an impressive UFO-related history. Launched in 1967, she became the largest ship in the Ministry of Agriculture's fleet, weighing in at over 2,500 tons. The Kaiyo Maru was also considered to be one of the most advanced nautical research ships of her time. On 2 known occasions, in 1984 and 1986, the premier research ship was reportedly tracked by a UFO. These chilling events were witnessed by at least 9 research scientists aboard the ship, including researcher Mikio Naganobu.
In December 1984, Mr. Naganobu was in the Falkland Islands at the southern end of South America. One night, he saw 24 UFOs. They were like lights floating in the sky. Then they suddenly went in 3 different directions.
The second reported sighting by the Kaiyo Maru occurs 2 years later, in 1986, but this time in the Dragon's Triangle. A huge, cigar-shaped UFO, over 100 feet long, is reported to approach the ship at high speed before diving into the water.
According to Mr. Naganobu, he witnessed another event in 1986 in the Japan Sea, a huge, cigar-shaped UFO approached the ship. The only thing they saw was a small red light that kept disappearing. But this time, the UFO was seen on radar.
These two extraordinary events were reported in detail in the Japanese edition of Scientific American magazine in September 1988.
Scientific American magazine reported about these incidents. In the article, the editor actually described that this event is very important because it's an official report of the government research ship of the Ministry of Agriculture.
Reports of UFOs in the Dragon's Triangle are not limited to the sea. From the Amelia Earhart incident onward, pilots have found the skies above the triangle to be as treacherous as the oceans below. A significant air-to-air UFO event occurred over the western end of the triangle, a near-miss collision between an unidentified aircraft and a TOA Airlines Convair 240.
One famous incident happened in Ikeda, when a pilot witnessed a UFO and the control tower announced to all the aircraft that there was a UFO approaching.
March 18th, 1965, 7:06 p.m. In a harried report to the air traffic control tower in Tomokazu, 43-year-old Captain Yoshiharu Inaba reports an unidentified oblong craft is approaching his jetliner as it cruises over the triangle, fast. Inaba then makes a 60-degree turn at over 500 miles per hour to avoid collision. The object stops abruptly, then follows alongside the airliner. Captain Inaba reports he's being shadowed by a UFO. He reports the object is 50 feet in length and radiates a greenish light. Several witnesses observe the situation from the ground. Meanwhile, a Piper Apache registered to Tokyo Airlines hears Captain Inaba's frantic transmissions. At 10:07 Universal Time, he sees the same UFO at 7,200 feet, heading east to Osaka and toward the Dragon's Triangle. Air traffic controller Akira Taguchi was at his post when Captain Inaba radios his report. He later confirms the object was seen over the mountains near Hiroshima and near the island of Shikoku. The same day, at roughly the same time, engineers who worked in the mountains near Hiroshima said they had seen something which had been a flying saucer. These are the facts. Nobody knows what this object really was.
The Dragon's Triangle has been known for thousands of years. And one of the stories that's connected with it is that there's a dragon that lives under the ocean and comes out of the ocean and snatches craft and vessels down into the depths.
One of the world's earliest UFO stories, in fact, originates from the waters off Japan, along with what many believe to be the first modern drawings of UFOs. The legend of the Utsuro Bune, a mysterious alien woman who arrives from the bottom of the Pacific in a round, craft-like vessel, goes back centuries. A closer look at the drawings reveals a flying saucer-shaped object, similar to those seen by countless witnesses in the 20th century. These drawings are thought to be the earliest known UFO-themed prints.
In the writings, they found a description of a bowl-like metal ship that arrived on a beach called Hiratono Hama. The witnesses approached and looked inside. There was a woman with smooth, light clothes. On the ship, there were letters that had never been seen before. They described what could have been a UFO in ancient Japan. There were no round ships in Japan at that time, so they believed it was a UFO.
Most interesting parts of the shapes of the Utsuro Bune, it is very similar to the modern UFOs. So my first interest is why the people can imagine this kind of shape 200 years ago.
Kazuo Tanaka, a professor at Gifu University in Tokyo, reopened the Utsuro Bune legend in 1997. His investigation led him to ask if the mysterious woman who came out of the waters of the Pacific so long ago was really part of, quote, a close encounter of the third kind.
I investigated the old ship in the Edo period, 200 years, intensively, but I could not find that any ships that is similar to these spherical shapes. This is similar to the Utsuro Bune. So it is very, very, I think, strange shape.
Beginning in the early 1800s, Japan suddenly sees a bounty of Utsurobune drawings, all by different artists in different parts of the country, each one telling the exact same story of a mysterious woman emerging from an eerily similar saucer-shaped craft.
The Utsurobune folklore is very famous in Japan, and had it done in many places in Japan. I could find 5 pictures. It is a little bit strange. So why people made so many drawings concerning the Utsurobune? It is a mystery.
These strange coincidences cause experts like Tanaka to wonder if Japan, which was completely closed to outsiders and outside news until 1857, experienced a mass UFO sighting at around this time.
The Utsurobune folklore in Japan has a key to solve the mystery of the modern UFOs, I think.
Coming up, scientists examine the theories behind the mysterious disappearance of vessels in the Dragon's Triangle. The mysteries of the sea pervade Japanese culture and history. Stories and legends surrounding UFO activity in the Dragon's Triangle have been around for centuries. On September 24th, 1235, strange celestial lights are seen to move and hover above General Yoritsumi's army encampment in Kyoto, which terrified the troops. The objects were thought to be dragons from the sea, on their way to attack them. 40 years later, 2 large-scale catastrophic events in the Dragon's Triangle would make world history and give its deep waters a deadly reputation.
The Devil's Triangle, which has accumulated a certain amount of lore in modern times, and this clearly, to some extent at least, reflects old Japanese traditions having to do with the sea, with dangers in the sea, with supernatural or even divine beings who live in the sea, who can both protect and also attack those who earn their livelihood from the sea, fishermen and so on.
In 1274, the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan assembled a massive force of over 900 ships to conquer the one territory he coveted, Japan. Victory was more than assured until a single catastrophic event in the Triangle stopped this massive armada cold.
Mongolia was governing maybe half of Europe and all over Asia, and they tried to invade Japan as well. A typhoon came and all of the ships were sunk, and they couldn't reach Japan.
And they brought about 40,000 troops in 1274 to Japan. More than half of that fleet was sunk in this storm, and so the Mongols' first invasion ended up as a major disaster. You know, some 20,000 Mongols were killed in that instance or lost their lives.
Khan made another, more massive attack on Japan in 1281. This time he brought 140,000 men and 3,000 ships. The second invasion had similar disastrous results. An estimated 70,000 Mongol troops were destroyed, along with the majority of the ships.
The second great effort to invade Japan was once again defeated by the arrival of a propitious wind, as the Japanese like to call it. And this created the notion of the divine wind.
At the time of the Mongolian invasion, it is believed that the wind saved Japan.
Experts and historians alike still question if events in this anomalous zone are the work of divine winds of benevolent gods, strange meteorological occurrences, or possibly something else.
The fact that nature intervened on 2 separate occasions, I don't know, it did put a little bit of folklore into Japanese history as far as heavenly intervention protecting Japan.
As Japan was all but closed to outsiders over much of its history, experts fear that a great reserve of UFO research into the Triangle is forever lost. It was not until the late 19th century that reports became more frequent. The American official whose work helped open Japan's door to the West was personally involved in a mystery involving possible UFOs in the Dragon's Triangle. July 8, 1853, 4 a.m. Commodore Matthew C. Perry is off the coast of Ulaga in Tokyo Bay. Suddenly, an unusual object emerges from the sky. Perry recorded this encounter in his log.
During the watch from midnight to 4 a.m., a very remarkable meteor was seen. It made its appearance in the south and west and illuminated the whole atmosphere. The spars, sails, and hulls of the ships in company, as well as our own, reflected its glare as distinctly as though a blue light were burning from each at the same time. From the south and west, about 15 degrees above the horizon, it pursued a northeasterly course in a direct line for a long distance, when it fell gradually toward the sea and disappeared.
What follows is a vivid description of something which does not resemble a meteor, something far more ominous.
Its shape was that of a large blue sphere with a red wedge-shaped tail, which, it could be easily observed, was formed of ignited particles and resembled the sparks of a rocket as they appear upon explosion.
UFO researchers in Japan are convinced that Commodore Perry, during one of the most important voyages west by an American, witnessed a UFO in the heart of the Dragon's Triangle.
There was a report of sightings of a UFO when the American leadership approached the Japanese government to open commerce. While his ship was floating at the Uraga, Perry wrote the report in his navigation diary. Others witnessed this sighting as well.
Perry continued to search for clues and answers, but died 5 years later in 1858, without further insight into the events of that night. Coming up, scientists at the world's largest wave tank at Tokyo University recreate some of the most dramatic events seen in the Dragon's Triangle.
This is where two big dragons are hiding themselves from 3,000 years ago. This area is called the Devil's Sea, and many ships have disappeared without good reason. Let's find out the biggest and strongest mystery of the 20th century, the Dragon's Triangle.
What we have seen is that in Japan and in the Ring of Fire, that before and after increased seismic activity or increased volcanic activity, there'll be a lot of sightings of these UFOs.
Deep beneath the Dragon's Triangle lies one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. Here, gigantic undersea tectonic plates shift constantly, and suboceanic volcano eruptions are quite frequent, all of which might be responsible for significant shipping losses and dramatic loss of life.
Back in the States, we receive message traffic on a regular basis that tells us volcano warning alerts. So not only do we know where they are, we have them plotted on our charts. If I go down and check my email right now, I have about 8 or 10 messages from these guys telling us, hey, there's a volcano here that has shown some sort of seismic activity, and your best bet is to steer clear.
When you get an underwater eruption, depending on how deep it is, if it's pretty deep, you'll just get lava flows coming out, but if it's closer to the surface, you'll get actual gas in the magma that forms bubbles, and it's an explosive eruption.
Dr. Joanne Stock is professor of geology and geophysics at Caltech University in Pasadena, California.
One of the Mariana Islands, which was erupting in 2003, it had these eruptions that were on the island itself, and people could see that there's pulses of gas coming out. It actually has more than 80 little vents that are offshore that are also active. If one of those was erupting, you might see the peak of the volcano on the island. It doesn't look like anything's happening, but something could be erupting underwater where your ship is sailing near it and could be affected or could sink because too much gas is in the water.
The gases created by underwater volcanoes can wreak havoc with ships, even huge container and cargo ships.
If you happen to get a gas bubble, a big gas bubble that came out of a vent that was underwater, if your ship was right on top of that gas bubble, you would sink because you wouldn't have enough buoyancy to keep your ship floating.
The Ring of Fire that lies within the Dragon's Triangle is filled with dangerous volcanoes at varied depths.
The shallowest ones are these islands above sea level, and then they go on down, 10,000 feet.
Why is there so much volcanic activity surrounding Japan and this area?
It may come as a surprise to some people to realize that the majority of the volcanism on the planet Earth is happening on the seafloor.
Most of the Pacific Ocean floor is moving from east to west, and as the seafloor is dragged down into the interior of the Earth, this water reacts with hot rock and makes volcanoes.
Volcanoes along the Marianas, which are erupting as a result of this plate collision, can toss aerosols and particulate matter all the way up to the stratosphere, and obviously if a plane flew into that, it might clog the engines.
Another dangerous phenomenon in the Dragon's Triangle is the so-called triangle waves. These bizarre oceanic enigma are swift and deadly and impossible to predict.
There are big waves, 7, 8, 9 feet high, crashing in from different directions. This creates huge waves up to 65 feet high. This is the most dangerous thing that I have ever seen.
Japan is located where there are seasonal big winds. In the wintertime, there tends to be a lot of bad weather and turbulence. Winds from different directions create the triangle waves.
The term triangular wave, sankakunami in Japanese, is a name used by Japanese people from the past. What it represents from a scientific point of view is not known.
Dr. Hiroshi Tomita, special researcher at Japan's National Maritime Research Institute, and Dr. Takuji Waseda, professor at the University of Tokyo, performed a unique experiment for the History Channel in the world's largest wave tank. It demonstrates the destructive capabilities of the kinds of triangle waves and currents that affect this area.
A U.S. commercial ship reported that they actually saw a wave over 100 feet high, but it was measured by sight, so they don't have any scientific proof. What my team is trying to do is measure in a more scientific way.
There are 32 plungers at the end of the tank, which we control the amplitude of the phase from a computer. These tank tests are scalable. The same thing can happen in the real ocean.
Dr. Waseda illustrates the nature of a triangle wave.
As two waves crosses each other, the wave pattern will form a triangular shape. When a ship encounters this kind of triangular shaped wave, the ship can move in quite a different way. Sometimes it can move this way, but sometimes it can roll. Roll, for example, for a ship is extremely dangerous. The energy piles up. It is said that the amplitude can be quite high because of the crossing sea. Not being able to predict the direction of the forces is a threat for a ship.
The phenomenon of triangle waves is reportedly responsible for the destruction of many ships and great losses of life in the Dragon's Triangle.
I think the scientific knowledge is very similar to the jigsaw puzzle. We have no piece that matches to the UFOs.
There are many reports of accidents, so I consider that it is a dangerous area. But we cannot define those accidents either from a volcano, natural causes, or some mysterious UFO.
For hundreds of years in the Dragon's Triangle, there have been countless reports of disappearances and eerie encounters with UFOs, drawing a perfect correlation to its mysterious counterpart in Bermuda, leading many researchers to call this hot zone the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle.
I've seen all the reports. I believe there are many people who see it and don't talk about it.
There are some people who say, I cannot believe until I see with my own eyes. But of course, the eyes are not always reliable. We have to research from many different points of view.
Maybe there are some doors that open frequently to the different dimensions on this planet. So, in theory, maybe it's possible there are doors like that in the ocean.
Modern researchers, both for the Dragon Sea off Japan and the Bermuda Triangle off the Florida coast, have hypothesized that there's an undersea UFO base or a USO base in those waters. They're very deep, there's a lot of volcanic activity, and sometimes the magnetic readings will throw off attempts to find objects on the bottom of the surface, so there may well be a USO base in the Dragon Sea off Japan.
Having the same name as a famous vampire can give you a bad reputation. But this Romanian prince earned his infamous name from his cool ways. The real Dracula left an enduring legacy, not just in blood, but also in brick, mortar, and stone. Now it's back to life on Lost Worlds, next on the History Channel.
They are mysterious stories that have captured the imaginations of UFO believers and sparked covert government investigations.
It was a gigantic object 300 meters in diameter. It made very strange aerial maneuvers.
But these are not celebrated American paranormal incidents. These UFO episodes took place in a country for years, shrouded in secrecy.
Behind the scenes, the Russian government, the Russian military take this phenomena very seriously. They've been lying directly to their own people.
May 2002. In a remote area 100 miles outside of Moscow, an investigative team from Kosmopoisk, a group that studies UFO sightings, searches for signs of UFO activity.
We are going to enter the forest. This is the place pointed out by local people to be the destination of different types of UFOs.
Soviet ufologists have been active since the 1960s. They claim that for decades, thousands of citizens have witnessed the appearance of unexplainable objects in the skies over Mother Russia. Today, ufologists in Russia work in the open and report their findings freely. This was not always the case. Before the policy of glasnost was introduced in 1985, independent investigations of UFOs in the former Soviet Union were conducted in a climate of secrecy and fear. At times, official government policy denied the existence of UFOs and any UFO activity, and prohibited anyone from reporting otherwise.
The UFO research in the former Soviet Union was a very complicated matter because one had to deal with overall state secrecy.
Meanwhile, the Soviet government was involved in covert UFO investigations of its own.
We know that the Russian government studied this secretly for a period of 40 years. We know that they took it very seriously. We also know that there have been various attempts, including more recent ones, to put a spin on this to say, there's nothing to it. That's a bunch of baloney.
The results of the Soviets' most far-reaching secret UFO study became public in the year 2000. The inquiry started in 1978 and took 13 years to complete. The investigative team consisted of top scientists and military experts, and was completely clandestine.
Certainly this collaboration between the Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense was not paraded. I mean, formally these studies were closed. Classified organizations took part in these studies. This research should have a secret character.
Colonel Boris Sokolov was the coordinator of the investigation. Shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, he met with American investigative journalist George Knapp.
Sokolov told us that just as in America, 90 to 95% of these cases could be explained away, but the remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained.
The 13-year Soviet UFO study scrutinized some of the most puzzling sightings in Russian history. In 1968, a cameraman documenting a test of a Soviet jet fighter noticed a huge triangular object in the sky. He focused his camera on the object and caught it on film. In 1977, an unusual aerial display sent tentacles of light streaming down over the town of Petrozavodsk. Some claim the event caused fine holes to be glazed in glass windows and concrete. In 1982, military personnel at an intercontinental ballistic missile base witnessed several brilliantly lit orbs overhead. Seconds later, a warning light indicated a missile had switched to the prepare to launch mode. Had an alleged UFO come close to starting a nuclear attack? UFO sightings over Russia are not limited to the recent past. Reports of peculiar-looking airborne objects date back centuries. However, no formal investigations were undertaken until the early 20th century, when an event of epic proportions demanded analysis. Tunguska, July 30th, 1908. In a remote area of Siberia, the morning calm was rocked by an explosion. The powerful blast was heard 1,000 miles away.
There was an enormous firewall blast, something on the order of 15 megatons of equivalent energy, which is roughly 1,000 times that of the Hiroshima blast at the end of the Second World War. This was an extraordinary event.
Because of the remoteness of the Tunguska region, it was almost 20 years before any government researchers visited the site. The first expedition to reach Tunguska was headed by Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik.
When the initial expedition got to the Tunguska area in 1927, the natives were reluctant to show the scientists into the region because they thought the god Agdi had devastated the area because of the wickedness that was going on, and he had destroyed the trees, killed the animals.
Kulik eventually convinced locals to direct him to the blast location. Believing a meteorite had caused the massive explosion, Kulik assumed he would find a crater at the point of the meteorite's impact. To his surprise, there was none.
He looked for meteorite samples on the ground because often when an object hits the Earth, it throws up debris, and the debris is recoverable around the edges of the crater. But of course he didn't find that either.
What Kulik discovered has stirred UFO debate for decades. At the blast's epicenter was a frozen swamp with an untouched clump of fully grown trees in the middle. Circled around the grove, 10 million dead trees lay in a symmetrical ring, seemingly mowed down by a cosmic scythe.
So here we have an enormous blast site with no crater, no fragments or meteorites around the rim of the crater, and this radial pattern of burnt trees knocked down for some 20 miles in all directions.
In the years that followed, others traveled to Tunguska to study the unusual occurrence.
There might have been fruits obtained by labors of another expedition sent by the head of the Soviet secret police in the late 1940s. But all we know is that such expedition existed. We do not know what has happened to the items and the information it collected.
Further baffling ufologists were reports of radiation damage in the Tunguska blast region.
There were also some reports of mutations taking place in plant life, and even some humans apparently suffered some gene damage.
In 1947, Russian Army Colonel Alexander Kazantsev developed a remarkable theory based on information about the devastating consequences of America's atomic bomb attacks on Japan.
He was listening to the report about the nuclear bombardment. The announcer gave a very long and very detailed description of how and in which direction trees, houses had fallen, and so on, how everything was hit. He realized that what had happened in Hiroshima, exactly the same happened at Tunguska, only nearly half a century ago.
Kazantsev hypothesized that the nuclear-like devastation seen at Tunguska must have been caused by the crash of a nuclear-powered alien spacecraft. But the scientific community rebuffs the UFO theory. Scientists claim the Tunguska explosion was caused by a rare but explainable natural event. They believe an asteroid dropped to just 3 miles above the Earth's surface and then exploded.
As the object came in, it was being decelerated and squeezed by atmospheric forces. It blew up with the force of a hydrogen bomb. The shock wave smashed down the forest, knocking trees away from the blast and resulting in a pattern away from ground zero.
But how would an asteroid explosion explain the reports of radiation damage in the Tunguska area? Scientists say it can be attributed to the sheer magnitude of the explosion.
As we mentioned before, the blast itself was 1,000 times greater than the Hiroshima blast at the end of World War II. The blast would have generated a series of very high-speed charged particles and would have been the cause of some of the mutations in the gene structures of plants and animals.
But to this day, scientific explanations do not satisfy many ufologists.
I have been several times to the place where the Tunguska body fell. I intentionally call it body, not meteorite. I mean, the catastrophe of an asteroid, of a comet, or of any other natural body cannot lead to such consequences.
A number of expeditions found things that they couldn't explain. There are some people who were saying that the evidence suggested this was some kind of an alien spaceship. That was the kind of magical explanation you use when you don't have enough real science to understand the physics and the astronomy involved.
Throughout the rest of the 20th century, magical explanations of unidentified flying objects over Russian skies would continue. And in one instance would help expose a top-secret Soviet military project. It was 1948. World War II was over, but the Cold War was just beginning. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had initiated the Berlin blockade and directed his scientists to develop a nuclear weapon to rival that of the United States. It was during this period that some claimed Stalin grew concerned about UFOs. It is said his interest stemmed from reports of a 1947 UFO incident in Roswell, New Mexico.
New Mexico in 1947 would have been a hotbed of Soviet espionage because we had all kinds of stuff there. The 509th Bomber Wing, the only atomic bomber wing group.
Purportedly, Stalin ordered Sergei Korolev, the founder of the Russian space program, to analyze information about the supposed Roswell crash and report his findings.
Mr. Korolev came up with an answer. Yes, UFOs exist. No, they present no immediate threat.
And after evaluating the information, all that the Russians had acquired on Roswell and on UFOs, Korolev concluded UFOs are real. They appear to be intelligently controlled. That's what he told Stalin, and Stalin in turn said, that's what my other people have concluded as well.
While concrete proof of the conversation does not exist, several Soviet scientific agencies did begin investigating UFOs in the ensuing years.
Stalin, after getting this information about Roswell and UFOs in general, did the same thing basically that the American government had been doing. He condemns UFOs in public and then conducts secret tests behind the scenes. He had all sorts of high-level scientists who would research the problem for him and then report to military officials, all behind the scenes.
Also hidden from public view were UFO reports culled from Soviet Air Force pilots. Between the mid-1950s and mid-1960s, pilots reported approximately 15,000 UFO sightings.
It is very difficult to find a pilot who has been flying for many years and has never seen a UFO.
Most of these sightings can be easily explained. In an era of superpower distrust, flights of American spy planes and spy balloons were common over Soviet skies. But investigative journalist George Knapp, who has viewed portions of the Soviet UFO files, found some of the pilot sightings perplexing.
There were 40 instances where Russian warplanes were sent after UFOs. This is not temperature inversion, this is not a weather balloon, this is not swamp gas, these are craft floating around in the airspace of Russia, and they sent warplanes to go chase them.
While pilots continued to report strange objects in the sky, none could offer tangible evidence to support their claims. But in 1968, over the skies of Riga, Latvia, an alleged UFO sighting was caught on film. As a Soviet propaganda film crew documented a test flight of a fighter interceptor jet, the pilot noticed an unusual object high in the sky.
And suddenly the pilot shouted, "Look, film it!" We looked and saw a triangle at a tremendous height.
Fighter planes scrambled to investigate. but the object quickly disappeared behind a cloud and was never seen again. It was later estimated that the craft was hovering approximately 7 miles above the ground. The film was sent to the Kremlin, where it remained locked from public view for years.
They really took it seriously. I say seriously because the film was taken away. It was declared completely secret.
Outsiders have only recently seen the confiscated film. While some maintain the film is conclusive evidence of a UFO, skeptics argue the vehicle was most likely a French-made high-altitude research balloon. As secrecy enveloped all government discussions of UFO issues, an underground army of Soviet ufologists began to form in the USSR. They kept their studies concealed.
Russians who study UFOs in this period report that they had a very serious feeling of threat from the Soviet government, that they were doing something which the Soviet government disapproved of.
The leader of civilian UFO research was Felix Ziegel, the man considered the father of Soviet ufology.
Felix Ziegel was a Soviet scientist. He was a doctor of mathematics and astronomy at the Moscow Aviation Institute. He made it his job to find out why are the strange objects or in the skies of his country.
Ziegel challenged the Soviet system by conducting paranormal lectures, organizing independent UFO investigations, and urging Soviet citizens to report any and all sightings. His efforts were not without risk.
We cannot say, of course, that people would be put in jail for it, but still Ziegel suffered. He was harassed both in his place of work, at the Institute of Aviation, and he was harassed by the state government authorities.
Ziegel and his investigators spread information about UFO sightings through an underground press network. Samizdat, private publications used to disseminate information, were strictly forbidden by the Kremlin.
In his time, brochures were printed in a samizdat way. They were collections of observations and letters, typed in 5 to 10 copies. All materials were typed with the use of carbon paper.
Samizdat papers were distributed by trustworthy messengers who secretly carried the copies from one person to the next. UFO information circulated in this covert manner until 1967, when suddenly it seemed as if ufologists were given a reprieve from government censure. Today it appears this respite was a smokescreen, part of an intricate government deception. The complex ruse began in 1967 when citizens reported multiple sightings of crescent-shaped UFOs over the skies of the Ukraine and the lower Volga Valley.
It was also seen as far south as the Caucasus Mountains, where many astronomers in observatories in the Caucasus Mountains would see these objects flying horizontally from west to east, crescent-shaped, heading toward the east.
For reasons unknown at the time, the government allowed press coverage and independent study of the sightings. Felix Ziegel was granted permission to form a government-sanctioned investigative committee made up of over 200 scientific and military experts. In October 1967, they convened at the Central House of Aviation and Cosmonautics in Moscow. Their goal? Determine the cause of the mass sightings. On television and in newspapers, Ziegel's committee appealed to Soviet citizens to report information on UFOs. For the first time in Soviet history, UFOs seemed to be an open topic.
It was like a breath of fresh air. Freedom of discussion about a forbidden subject was permitted to the Soviet citizens. And this was something unheard of. And alas, it did not last long.
Within a few months of Ziegel's televised appeal, the steel jaws of Soviet censorship clamped down. Reporting of UFOs was once again off limits. The subject was dropped from the controlled media, and Ziegel's committee was ordered to disband.
The committee was to encourage people to report. As soon as the reports began to gather, somebody in Moscow quashed the activity, canceled the committee, canceled publication of further works, and put a lid on it.
Cries of a Kremlin whitewash were immediately sounded.
Why the cover-up takes place, I don't know. Is there a cover-up? There's no question about it.
But what they were covering up is the question. UFO buffs believe they were covering up alien visitations. I think the evidence is clear they were covering up descriptions of their own secret military aircraft and missile activities and satellite activities.
Scientist and NASA consultant James Oberg came to this conclusion in 1977 after studying Soviet space vehicle launch patterns and comparing them to the dates of the 1967 sightings. He deduced that the crescent-shaped objects witnessed in the sky were not alien in nature, but could be attributed to secret tests of a new Soviet missile warhead.
People in the area saw the rockets, especially at night, saw the streamers, the contrails in the sky, even heard the rockets. They were told by the government that there was nothing there, that it was not anything ours. It became a UFO phenomenon.
Later dubbed by the Pentagon as a fractional orbital bombardment system, the Soviets had good reason to keep the tests secret.
It was designed to sneak under our radar as a first strike weapon. It was one of these scary things that you only build it if you mean to make a sneak attack. It was also illegal to have such a weapon because in 1967, the U.S. and Russia and other countries signed a treaty forbidding the placing of nuclear weapons into orbit.
But why, after crushing public dissemination of UFO information for years, did the government briefly loosen its restrictions in 1967? It appears now to have been a deliberate ploy to fool its citizens and the international community about the true nature of the sightings.
The Soviet government did not want the public to understand what was going on. They didn't want the Americans to know, for example, what was going on. It was a useful camouflage. It diverted people's attention. Because it was a UFO, Western journalists would laugh rather than investigate it. The cover-up by the Soviet government is in letting people think they're flying saucers.
The strategy backfired when the extensive UFO data collected by Felix Ziegel's committee was published in magazines.
The Soviet government realized what these reports really were. They're military secrets. Not described accurately, but accurately enough to be of use to the CIA if they ever caught on. The government said, "Oh my gosh," and other things in Russian, and said no more UFO reports get published in the Soviet Union.
For 10 years, public discussion of UFOs was effectively brought to a halt. But that would change in 1977 with the appearance of a strange-looking object over Soviet skies, witnessed by thousands of astonished citizens. September 20th, 1977. As dawn approached in the small Russian port city of Petrozavodsk, a spectacular aerial display lit up the skies. The incident would become one of the most studied UFO sightings in Soviet history.
The phenomenon of Petrozavodsk is one of the greatest abnormal phenomena on the territory of our country.
At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, civilians and military personnel reported seeing huge star-like apparitions shooting in the sky.
As it flew up in the sky, it appeared to come over the city and then head off toward the horizon. People who were out in the streets of the town saw this blazing jellyfish streaming tentacles down from the saucer-shaped bright core.
The impressive display lasted approximately 10 minutes. Witnesses claimed that a host of strange occurrences on the ground accompanied the sighting.
They reported all sorts of phenomena. They smelled ozone, the computers were crashing, drivers lost the control of their vehicles and went into ditches.
Perhaps the phenomenon most difficult to explain was the appearance of finely glazed holes in glass windows and rocks around the city.
There is no explanation for this fact, but the connection is direct by the time parameters. There had been no holes before the event, and then they appeared.
Witnessed by thousands, the aerial display above Petrozavodsk was impossible to refute. While the sighting remained a mystery to Soviet citizens, NASA consultant James Oberg quickly discovered its origins.
Because of my connection with the space program and my knowledge of satellites and rockets, I was able to find out within a matter of hours There was a rocket launching that morning from a secret space center north of Moscow at precisely the time people were seeing this UFO.
The jellyfish-like display was triggered by the launch of the Cosmos 955 spy satellite. As the rocket engine contrails were backlit by the rising morning sun, it produced the tentacle effect observed by witnesses.
So this what they call basically the smoking gun of Soviet ufology. They call it a Medusa, or jellyfish UFO, because it was streamers of light coming down from the streamers in the rocket engines of the rocket, as it turned out.
As with previous mass sightings, the government had ample reason to keep the truth hidden from Soviet citizens. The satellite was launched from a secret military space center called Plesetsk, one of several undisclosed missile bases scattered throughout the Soviet Union. Most ufologists accept the satellite launch as the cause of the aerial display, but many argue it does not fully clarify the mystery.
How shall we explain the appearance of some beams that burnt the glass? When the pieces of the glass were analyzed at the Institute of Metrology in Moscow, they concluded that these holes resulted from badly glazed window glass. That is, a purely technical defect took place.
I do not believe that the launch of a secret military satellite would explain the holes that were made in the glass. My personal opinion, no, this was not man-made technology that's responsible for such effects.
There were some reports of holes being drilled into glass window panes and in paving stones. I saw those reports. I can't explain it. And all these sorts of additional phenomena, these additional reports, are typical of what happens when people see a very sudden, shocking sight in the sky and look around them for corroborative evidence. Most of the time, it's irrelevant, independent, and sometimes even imaginary.
While the mysterious holes might never be fully explained, the Petrozavodsk incident had much deeper consequences inside the walls of the Kremlin.
The upshot of this incident was the decision of the Soviet government to create a secret program to study UFOs.
In the weeks following the Petrozavodsk sighting, the Soviet Academy of Sciences received inquiries from several European nations concerned about the nature of the event. In response, the Academy of Sciences requested permission from the Kremlin to initiate a top-secret investigation of anomalous occurrences. Although aware the majority of these events were not paranormal in nature, the scientists admitted in their request that they could not provide a scientific basis for all UFO sightings.
The Academy of Sciences can neither ignore or explain the paranormal phenomena similar to that observed in September 1977 in Petrozavodsk. The program was organized to show that we did not know the answers to these questions and would be studying it on the scientific level. That was the way the official scientific program for studying abnormal phenomena and extraterrestrial flying objects started its work in the Soviet Union.
In 1978, the investigation that later became known as Institute 22 was formally started. The study lasted 13 years and was completely concealed from public view. But why did the Soviet government spend time and money to investigate a phenomenon it already knew the origins of?
There's really no surprise that the Soviet military, even if they understood the nature of most of these reports, would still investigate them. The Soviets traditionally spied on themselves as severely as they spied on the West.
If they already knew that these are missile tests, why do they have to have a nationwide study behind the scenes? I mean, it's not like the results of the study were ever going to be published anywhere. It was a secret. So it makes no sense.
While the rationale for the beginnings of the study is still debated, there is no doubt the scope of the investigation was far-reaching. The Institute 22 inquiry was conducted jointly between the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense.
It was very useful for the Academy of Sciences to collaborate and to carry out studies together with the Ministry of Defense, because naturally it was much easier for the Ministry of Defense to get the information we had no access to.
The armed forces were ordered to study what, if any, influence possible UFOs might have on the proper functioning of technical military equipment. In addition, hundreds of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and pilots were recruited to watch for and report on UFOs. No one was told why the reports were being taken.
The Ministry of Defense has an enormous observance potential. First, military units are located all over the country. Second, unlike civil organizations, an order from the Minister of Defense is sufficient for making a potential viewer of each military man, and this was done.
Every single unit in the vast Soviet military empire had to comply with this study. That is, any UFO, any anomalous object, any ball of light, any strange thing in the sky whatsoever had to be fully investigated.
Scientists were directed to investigate the physical nature of alleged paranormal phenomenon. The data collected by the military and scientists was analyzed in a lab located in a nondescript building in a suburb of Moscow.
The personnel of the laboratory were not numerous. Not more than 10 people, and this number was never exceeded. But the specialists from almost all the scientific areas worked there, from a physician to specialists in radioelectronics, meteorology, and astrogeophysics. Practically all the specialists were represented there. It was done in order to study all possible aspects of UFOs.
Six years into the study, Institute 22 would be called on to scrutinize an incident of global consequence, when a suspected UFO incident placed the world on the brink of nuclear war. The early 1980s were a time of tense relations between the Soviet Union and the West. The era of détente had ended, and the Russian landscape was studded with intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Each contained nuclear weapons aimed westward. It was at one of these silos that a reported UFO incident caused a nuclear scare. Today, this ICBM silo in the Ukraine is deserted, dismantled in compliance with a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the U.S. and USSR. But at this silo in 1982, something went terribly wrong. It started at approximately 6 p.m. when soldiers and villagers in the nearby town of Bielo-Korovichi witnessed a strange object in the dusk sky. A military officer at the time described what he saw.
I was riding a motorcycle not far from here. I saw a large object in the air. It had a perfect geometric shape.
At the same moment inside the silo, an emergency warning light indicated that a nuclear missile had switched to launch mode.
The most telling testimony comes from the communications officer who said that somehow something entered the correct code.
But Moscow had not ordered a launch, nor had any personnel in the bunker touched the control panel. For 15 agonizing seconds, technicians frantically scrambled to stop the launch. Then, without explanation, the launch sequence was aborted.
They were ready for launch. The UFO, poof, goes away. Poof, the command control module goes back to normal.
Had a UFO somehow interfered with the launch controls of a nuclear missile? A team of investigators from Institute 22, the secret state-sponsored UFO research team, was immediately ordered to the missile base.
They established within a very short period, literally half a day, that a military training exercise took place at a nearby aerial ground.
Investigators learned that the sighting occurred at the same time and in the same area where the military was testing flares. Dropped out of planes, the flares provided 5 to 7 minutes of illumination. That explained the strange display in the sky. But why did the nuclear launch sequence activate?
The fact that the emergency situation coincided with the effects which took place is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but it is still a coincidence.
The ICBM control equipment was systematically taken apart and rebuilt, but no defects were found.
It's not just an electrical malfunction. Something entered the correct launch codes. That just doesn't happen every day. We hear from our government UFOs are not a matter of national security. The Russian government has been telling its people the same thing. They're trying to confuse us. This incident is clear evidence, if ever there was, that UFOs do carry national security implications.
After examining the ICBM episode, the investigative team of Institute 22 continued to scrutinize various sightings around the country. Some who reported UFOs had a much closer view than those on Earth. Cosmonauts.
The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, is quoted in the Thread 3 documents as saying, "I can tell you that UFOs are real, and if you allow me, I'll tell you a lot more." The second man in space, cosmonaut Titov, said that there were 7 UFOs dancing around his space capsule during his brief flight into space.
However, even to this day, most cosmonauts are reluctant to speak about any unusual phenomenon they witnessed in space.
There's a ridicule factor, there's a laughter curtain, there are career consequences from reporting a UFO and taking it seriously.
But in this rare interview obtained by the History Channel, 2 cosmonauts spoke of unusual objects they encountered in space.
Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke of such things.
Former Commander Vladimir Kovalyonik of the Salyut 6 space station revealed that on May 5, 1981, he observed an unrecognizable illuminated entity outside the porthole of his craft.
The object had an elliptical shape and flew with us. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. It produced a golden light, very beautiful to watch. A second explosion followed, and 2 spheres appeared. As we entered the darkness of Earth's shadow, I could no longer see them.
On a Mir mission in 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov managed to videotape an anomalous object during a routine docking procedure.
I was looking out the biggest window. It was directly in front of me. I am familiar with the construction of all spaceships, but this was different.
There is ongoing debate about sightings of unidentified objects by cosmonauts and American astronauts alike. Skeptics insist there is enough debris left in orbit to constitute a plethora of unusual sightings. As cosmonauts traveled amidst the stars, the 1990s saw major changes take place on Soviet soil. When the walls of communism crumbled, American UFO investigator George Knapp ventured to Russia, hoping to discover just what secrets the Soviets had been hiding about alien encounters. What he found was startling. Beginning in the mid-1980s, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union conducted several summits aimed at reducing both nuclear arms and tensions between the 2 superpowers. Shortly after one such meeting, President Ronald Reagan revealed he and Mikhail Gorbachev had discussed the topic of alien encounters.
I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
Reagan made 5 different public statements, including one to the United Nations, that, well, boy, wouldn't it be something if UFOs were suddenly a threat to us and we'd all get together? And so Gorbachev kind of responded, yeah, it sure would. You know, we would get together. Lo and behold, we did get together. You know, the wall came tumbling down, perestroika, glasnost.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a new era of openness in Russia. Thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, Nevada, investigative journalist George Knapp, who had studied many American UFO incidents, realized the time was perfect to explore Russian reports.
3 years ago, we had succeeded in obtaining several hundred pages of secret Russian UFO documents and photos. Other Western journalists followed. Today, it's a new ballgame. The lid has been dropped on government UFO files, although there is still plenty of information to be found.
It occurred to me, now may be the time to go ahead and try to find out what the Russians know about UFOs. It was a tumultuous, crazy time, but a wonderful time to be there as a journalist.
In 1993, Knapp traveled to Russia and was introduced to Boris Sokolov, the coordinator of Institute 22. Like many government-funded scientific projects from the era, Institute 22's funding had been cut and the project disbanded. Sokolov provided Knapp with some of the recently declassified UFO files, containing information on the cases that were more difficult to explain.
He had culled from the thousands of reports some of the most interesting ones and had kept them in these binders, and we were able to get them and bring them back.
Why would the Russian military study all of this stuff?
Colonel Sokolov said it was a very practical reason. They knew that UFOs could do things that their planes couldn't. Figured by studying it, they may be able to get an advantage over us in terms of stealth technology.
Upon returning to the United States, Knapp made some of the files public. As a result, Colonel Sokolov was ridiculed by some back in his homeland.
Officially, Russia was a democracy, but the communists still had a lot of influence. There were communist newspapers that attacked him broadly as being a sellout to Mother Russia.
But the public scorn Sokolov endured was certainly less severe than the consequences he might have been subject to in the old Soviet Union.
My friend put it this way. He said, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years ago, we'd all be shot for giving up these secrets.
But in 2000, the relaxed political climate allowed Sokolov and scientist Yuli Platov to publish a report summarizing the findings of Institute 22. Entitled The History of UFO State Research in the USSR, the report concluded that of the 3,000 UFO sightings investigated, 90 to 95% of the incidents could be attributed to man-made phenomenon, mostly missile launches and research balloons.
The remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained. He was not willing to conclude that any of these things were extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or aliens from the future or anything of that sort.
The thing is that before, the enthusiastic ufologists had affirmed in literature that all we saw was due to contacts with the extraterrestrial civilizations. No. It turned out that only a very small percentage of events remained unexplained.
But in a land that for so long concealed information and suppressed dialogue, many ufologists wondered if the report revealed the entire truth.
There is a vast treasure trove of KGB documents on this topic somewhere that no one has ever seen. And I know the KGB did release some documents in the early 90s, but it is presumed by a lot of folks that the best stuff is still hidden in a vault somewhere.
What happened to the files? Who keeps them? Until we ourselves go through the files, we cannot say whether what Mr. Platov and Mr. Sokolov say is true.
It will probably never be known exactly how many Soviet UFO files remain classified, or what they contain. Most in the scientific community doubt any smoking guns exist in the unseen files.
People in Russia still have a very powerful sense of gossip and rumors, because under Soviet days, so many things were illegal to talk about, illegal to know. So they replaced the reality with a very rich mythology. UFOs became part of that mythology in Russia, and it's still a very powerful theme over there.
But many UFO enthusiasts remain suspicious, believing that the proof of alien encounters exists and is still being hidden.
Looks like your everyday move for this team of mega movers. That is, until a massive hurricane threatens to foil the whole plan. Can this sacred structure withstand the forces of nature?
It's not going to be a cakewalk.
It's a race against time on
one of the deadliest places on Earth. A hot zone where ships and airplanes vanish without a trace. But halfway around the globe, at its polar opposite, there lies another triangle. This one more mysterious and more deadly. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Dragon's Triangle is an area where ships disappear, planes disappear, and other kind of phenomena occur.
There's really no way to predict what sorts of things you're going to see out here. And we do see some pretty odd stuff.
We'll explore the mysteries, the evidence, and the science behind one of the most treacherous, dangerous, and puzzling triangle regions on the planet.
If your ship was right on top of that gas bubble, you would sink because you wouldn't have enough buoyancy to keep your ship floating.
As events involving ships, planes, and submarines continue to terrify passengers and mystify experts, many wonder, what is down there? And what could possibly be next in the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle? 25 degrees north, 142 degrees east. These are the coordinates of the center of one of the most mysterious triangle regions on Earth. For centuries, this area has hosted some of the most bizarre disappearances of ships, airplanes, and loss of life anywhere on the planet. But this is not the Bermuda Triangle. It is a 500,000 square mile area located in the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Devil's Sea, or the Dragon's Triangle, is an area off the southern coast of Japan where supposedly many unexplained shipwrecks have taken place, where planes have disappeared, very similar to the Bermuda Triangle in, of course, a very different part of the world.
The Dragon's Triangle is a large area of water off the east coast of Japan, bounded by Japan and Guam, in the Philippine Sea, in which navigators and ships have reported for thousands of years loss of ships, loss of compass readings, and strange objects flying out of the water.
Curiously, its counterpoint in the Atlantic, the infamous Bermuda Triangle, lies directly across the globe, along the 35-degree latitude line. Both areas are believed to contain some of the world's
flying off Guam. Some say she was on a spy mission for the United States, and she lost her compass bearings.
July 2nd, 1937, 12:30 p.m. Pioneering aviator Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan left Lae, New Guinea on the last leg of a round-the-world flight. Their flight plan would have taken them 2,500 miles to Howland Island for a refueling stop and over the Dragon's Triangle. The two were never seen again.
Her compass and her instruments went down. Her plane was lost. She was never heard from again.
To this day, Earhart's disappearance remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved cases.
The Dragon's Triangle is also host to stories of ghost ships appearing out of the fog.
Berlitz associates the Dragon's Triangle with one of the sea's greatest mysteries as well, ghost ships. Large ships floating at sea, completely devoid of people, cargo, and equipment. He claims the region has been fraught with unmanned floating hulks for centuries.
In Japanese tradition, these ghost ships are typically malevolent. They want to destroy the living people that they run into.
Ghost ships exceeding 100,000 tons have been seen floating aimlessly in the Dragon's Triangle. If true, how does an entire crew vanish without a trace? Berlitz points out a pair of horrifying ghost ship cases in his book. June 11th, 1881, 4 a.m. According to reports, the HMS Bashante encountered the legendary glowing Flying Dutchman ghost ship late at night in the deepest area of the Dragon's Triangle. A naval ensign aboard the ship, a prince who would later become England's King George V, made the following entry in the ship's log.
The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. She emitted a strange phosphorescent light, as of a phantom ship, all aglow. She came up on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge saw her. But on arrival, there was no vestige or any sign whatever of any material ship to be seen, either near or right away to the horizon. The night became clear and the sea calm.
January 1989. Berlitz says that a Japanese whaling ship skippered by Captain Moro Sagakami came within 50 feet of a small fishing boat that was bobbing erratically in their course one dark, clear night. The captain and several crew members arrived to find a ship completely barren of all crew and cargo, save for the corpse of the captain, still gripping the helm.
As far as ghost ships are concerned, what if the crews themselves were abductees? So the reason...
The world's deepest waters, much of which remains unexplored to this day.
Both the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon Sea lie along the same latitude, and both have the same anomaly where geographic north and magnetic north seem to come together, so compass readings are off by 20 degrees. And that's why researchers believe there are so many lost planes and ships in these areas.
It's quite interesting to see that they are both at exactly the same location.
The boundaries of the Dragon's Triangle are generally believed to stretch from central Japan to Guam to the Mariana Islands. While lesser known to the west than the Bermuda Triangle, unexplained disappearances and strange phenomena occur in this area with a far greater and more alarming frequency. Since World War II, it is believed that over 1,500 vessels and hundreds of military, commercial, and civilian aircraft have disappeared.
The Dragon's Triangle has had many more ships disappear than the Bermuda Triangle. And the ships that have disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle have been large ones, military ships, cargo ships.
What's so odd about the Dragon's Triangle compared to the Bermuda Triangle is that the Bermuda Triangle has so much more press. Why would that be?
The area first gained modern notoriety in 1989 with the publication of Charles Berlitz's The Dragon's Triangle. Berlitz, coincidentally, was the author of the book The Bermuda Triangle, which reopened that mysterious case in 1974. For years, Berlitz studied the reports of ship and aircraft disappearances in this area, along with reports of UFO sightings and other anomalies. According to his research, compasses often fail or give wildly inaccurate readings in the triangle. Boats and airplanes report being moved far off course in a matter of seconds. Sightings of ghost ships have been reported for over 100 years. And finally, hundreds of ships, airplanes, and even submarines have, without warning, fallen to the bottom of this extremely deep region. One of Berlitz's most terrifying and puzzling unsolved cases involves what he considers unseen and unknown forces that pulled legendary pilot Amelia Earhart down to her death in the heart of the triangle in 1937.
She goes more than 2/3 of the way around the world, over 22,000 miles. I look eastward over the Pacific, she writes. I shall be glad when we have the hazards of its navigation behind us. This fleeting radio contact is the last verified report of Amelia Earhart.
Here's a story where Amelia Earhart was...
Time-space continuum of planet Earth. This unexplained phenomenon reportedly causes ships and airplanes to be forced off course by miles and miles, and for clocks to suddenly change time, all in an instant.
Some of the theories for the Dragon's Triangle include that it's anomaly, that there's some kind of magnetic anomaly, that there's some kind of black hole in the ocean, that there's something from outer space that zooms down and has some kind of interaction with, craft there and they disappear. But as far as we know, things happen there and we don't know why.
In the late 1950s, American television and radio personality Arthur Godfrey, an accomplished pilot in his own right, reportedly experiences a frightening occurrence in the Dragon's Triangle, one that nearly cost him his life.
In the 1950s, the band leader and television personality from America, Arthur Godfrey, was piloting a twin-engine craft over the Dragon's Triangle. He saw a USO. The instruments on his plane went dead. He was low on fuel. He had to navigate by the sun because his compass was out. When his instruments came back on and he was able to get over land again, he found out the same exact thing that he had experienced missing time during the period.
With only enough fuel for 3 hours, Godfrey piloted his craft on dead reckoning. After 1 hour, his instrumentation returned, and he was able to return to course. However, Godfrey would later report that he inexplicably lost a half hour. His clocks literally rolled backwards. Fortunately for Godfrey and his crew, they safely arrived in Tokyo, avoiding the terrible fate of Amelia Earhart and countless others in the Dragon's Triangle. Other similar time-space anomalies over the Triangle have been reported by military pilots in the 1950s and 60s, including Air Force pilot Frank Hopkins, an advisor to the 106th Air Transport Group. In the summer of 1968, he wrote to Argosy magazine with a story of a time-space continuum shift while flying the C-97 Stratofreighter over the Dragon's Triangle. In the spring of 1966, I was a basic navigator aboard an Air Guard C-97 flying from Kwajalein Island to Guam. We looked forward to a pleasant night flight of about 6 to 6.5 hours. Hopkins says that, as per protocol, he plots his position hourly using star navigation. But during the 3rd hour of the flight, something inexplicable occurs. I shot a second celestial fix. Weather was excellent. Only problem was, and I almost fell out of the airplane when I put this on the chart, this last fix was almost 340 nautical miles down.
The vessel is adrift. The reason there's no crew, no remains, is that the cruiser's simply gone, taken by a USO.
According to Berlitz's research, dozens of vessels have gone even further off the radar. They have disappeared from the Triangle entirely. On April 19, 1949, the Kuroshio Maru No. 1 disappears with a reported crew of 23. On June 8, 1952, 29 crew members of the Chifuku Maru No. 5 vanish. June 26, 1955, a U.S. Air Force F-3B jet loses radio contact with its base. Its 2-man crew disappears. March 12, 1957, 8 crewmen aboard a United States Air Force KB-50 tanker transport are reported missing. June 7, 1963, remains of the Donan Maru are found floating on the ocean surface off Shio Nomizaki. But an event forever etched into Triangle lore and Japanese history is the mysterious sinking of the Japanese research vessel Kaiyo Maru No. 5.
Kaiyo Maru No. 5 was a Coast Guard ship researching about that area.
On September 24, 1952, the Japanese Maritime Safety Agency research vessel Kaiyo Maru No. 5 is in the Dragon's Triangle.
She went out to the Dragon's Triangle specifically to find out the cause of all the losses of vessels in that area.
Suddenly, without any distress call, she disappears forever, taking with her a crew of 22 and 9 scientists. In their official Kaiyo Maru No. 5 accident investigation report from March 1953, the Marine Coast Guard states, "We have to investigate when, where, why it disappeared, because there are no witnesses and no survivors for this accident." While many conclude that the ship fell victim to an underwater volcano's eruption, others remain unconvinced.
Very ironic that here you have a ship that's going out looking for other ships and it disappears. That oftentimes happens in these mysterious triangles.
Because of this event's importance to Japanese maritime history, today in Tokyo there is a shrine dedicated to the memory of those lost in this mysterious sinking. Coming up, commercial and military pilots and captains report frightening shifts of the time-space continuum when navigating through the Dragon's Triangle.
He had experienced missing time during the period he saw the UFO.
Like the Bermuda Triangle in the Atlantic, the Dragon's Triangle in the Pacific just off Japan is believed to play havoc with the so-called